I took the bike to COTA for California Superbike School, and it was really a blast to have it out in its natural habitat like that. I took it back to Colorado to let it stretch its legs in the mountains again. During the next Texas Mile, however, I was only able to get up to 187 at the top run, and I couldn't understand how just a tune had made 16-mile-an-hour difference, but all the work I'd done completely rebuilding the engine with all these very expensive parts only got me another 3 miles an hour. It didn't make sense to me. So I took it to a local dyno shop, and they dynoed it at 190 horsepower max. Now that's compared to about 183 horsepower on a stock engine, so it's not a big delta. I took it out on COTA again for a track day that November, and I thought more about the dyno, and something just didn't seem right. So I called S2 and told him, and I also mentioned that it had been running fairly rich according to the dyno, and asked if we could lean it out to maybe get more power. He started asking questions about things like piston protrusion, and I reminded him that I hadn't measured that because we'd been talking during the whole build, and I also reminded him that I bought all the parts from him. He knew I had a stock block, he knew what pistons he'd sold me, what rods he'd sold me, he had the head, he did all the head work, he sold me the cams, so I didn't understand why he was asking these questions. And at some point he said, look, just send me the entire bike, I'll tear it down, I'll fix whatever I need to, and we'll get it running so that you've got a finished bike back for me. I agreed to put it on a truck to him, and that was in April of 2018. S2 started tearing into the engine and told me that all the valves had hit the pistons. When I asked him why, he told me that it was because I hadn't set the cam timing correctly. I reminded him that I used the exact tools, the exact process, measurements, everything that BMW recommended for cam setting. He told me that because these were race cams, they had to be degreed in. I told him I could understand that for squeezing the last bit of performance out of an engine, but it was hard to believe that using the factory process and tools was going to cause my valves to hit the pistons. I then asked him about the head gasket. I said, we had to use much thicker shims on the valves, which tells me that after he did the head work, the valves were pushing down further into the combustion chamber. And in order to get the same clearance, you'd have to bring the head up, which means the thicker head gasket. And he sort of roundabout said, well, maybe, but he wouldn't really admit that he probably sold me the wrong head gasket, even though he knew everything that was going into the bike. So I was being blamed because I didn't set the timing right, even though he'd sold me the head gasket. So him selling me that head gasket that was just a fraction of an inch too thin was the reason that now my entire build that I'd done was destroyed and all that money was wasted. Over the next year or so, it was just one excuse after another. There'd be a little progress and then nothing for like a month or two. I'd ask for pictures and he'd say that he doesn't show proof of life pics. I had no idea if my bike was even there or had been parted out or anything. All I got were reasons why he couldn't work on my bike. They were personal reasons, and I tried to be as patient as I could because of the nature of these reasons. He kept telling me my bike was a priority, yet he'd also tell me a new reason why he couldn't work on it. The next contact from S2 was in regard to the wiring. The claim was that the lithium battery I'd installed that was fine for me, and the trigger for the relay that fed the radar detector spliced into the taillight, which worked fine for me, had started burning up every electrical component in the bike. So I was told it was my fault. I ended up having to buy all new wiring harnesses. I believe he said he replaced the regulator, the starter, not the ECU, the battery, multitude of other things. He told me he could send it to me as is with a wiring diagram, and I said, absolutely not. I've spent enough time and money with you already. I don't want to see that bike until it's perfect. A few months later, S2 texted and said the bike was all together. It was ready to ship. There was a truck coming on Saturday, and all he had to do was reset the computer or adapt the computer. And I reminded him, I said, don't send it until it's all done. At that time, he also told me the S3 cams that I bought from him and put in the engine were no good, even though he recommended them a year or two earlier. So he, without telling me, had pulled those out and put his own cams in it. A day or two after the truck left his shop, he texted me to let me know my bike was on the way, which was great. But when I asked him, I said, "So you got your computer working and you have it all running perfectly, right?" He said, "No, it wasn't even running when he sent it away, but he left a short to-do list on the tank." The bike showed up a few days later and I had it shipped right to supplier 5, S5. I went out and looked at it and it wasn't even close to complete. The body panels were all missing, and turns out they were in a box back at S2, so I had to have him ship those out. Fasteners missing. The bike wouldn't even try to start, it just flipped error codes. For the next several months, I played mediator between S5 and S2. S5 could not get the bike to start. They sent the ECU back twice to S2, both of them blaming the other one. Finally, S5 had tried everything they could and I had to take the bike back. I plugged in my GS911 and I got the same error codes that S5 had gotten. I called S4, they referred me to S6. I shipped my bike to S6. S6 literally had my bike running within 5 hours of receiving it. It took him that long to start tearing parts off and realize that the starter was connected backwards. Once S6 had the bike running, then more problems surfaced. A clip was found under the air filter about ready to fall into the throttle body. A new cam sensor had to be installed. A large oil leak was noticed coming from the valve cover. Only 2 of the 6 valve cover bolts were torqued correct, the rest were loose. The horn wasn't mounted correctly, so the wire wasn't connected. Quick shifter wasn't adapted. All the bodywork had to be installed and some hardware was missing. The HP seat I bought didn't fit properly and had to be fitted. The clutch cable was installed incorrectly in the clamp. Coolant was low. The knock sensors were missing, but the software had not been changed to ignore them, and I needed them anyway for pump gas. My stock seat was never returned. Once S6 had all these things fixed, he sent it back to me so that I could start riding and put on the break-in miles. However, more headache. The bike wouldn't start the day after it arrived, and I had to replace the starter clutch assembly, where I also noticed a sleeve installed backwards. The bike stranded me a mile from home with a bad regulator that I had to replace that was supposedly new from S2. The oil plug was leaking. The stator looked blackened from excessive heat, which could be problematic, so I ordered a new one of those in case that fried the regulator. A loose hose clamp caused coolant to spill all over the floor. The fan didn't work from a blown fuse. There was a bent edge at the engine case where someone used it for a pry point. One of the case bolts had over a 1/4 inch of exposed threads. And I found all these items in less than 5 miles of riding it. After all that, 28 months and all I spent on it, the bike couldn't even get its 600-mile break-in period before it died on the highway the other night. Now it's getting ready to ship back to S6 so that he can check it out. Maybe it's a weird electrical problem, but it kind of seems like the engine's seized up. I love this bike and I've had so many great experiences with it, including setting a world record on it. I'm at a point now where I'm probably going to end up putting a stock engine back in it, which means I'll have completely wasted several years and thousands of dollars in stress on what I've done with it. I'm sure not telling anybody not to customize or modify their motorcycles or cars because it's fun. I love doing it. I would just say to think before you modify, and if you do modify, learn to do it yourself properly, or at least trust the guy with a wrench.